My name is Sienna Fry, and I'm 29 years old. 3 years ago, when my father passed away, he left me something everyone in my family practically laughed at during the funeral: a rundown stone farmhouse sitting on 11 neglected acres, nearly 2 hours outside the city. The place hadn't been touched in well over a decade. My younger brother, Julian, walked away with what everyone called the real inheritance: a fully furnished luxury apartment in Manhattan, complete with a private parking garage and a breathtaking river view. My mother made sure nobody missed the difference when the lawyer read the will. She held Julian's hand the whole time and barely glanced in my direction. "Your father always said Julian was the one who'd go places," she told me afterward, not even trying to soften the blow. "The house is just something for you to have. It ain't much, but it's yours." I still remember standing in that lawyer's office, clutching a folder filled with property deeds to a house with part of its roof caved in and mold crawling up the kitchen walls, while my brother casually twirled the keys to a $2 million condo he'd never lifted a finger to earn. I didn't cry in front of them. No way. I saved every tear for the drive home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned ghost white. For as long as I could remember, my mother had one favorite line whenever Julian and I were compared. Asterisk, he is vision. You just work hard. Asterisk. She always said it like working hard was somehow second-rate, like it was what people settled for when they weren't talented enough to dream bigger. After hearing it year after year, I kinda started believing her. But standing alone inside that broken farmhouse, with dust drifting from the exposed ceiling beams and silence echoing through empty rooms, something deep inside me woke up, something I honestly thought had died years earlier. So I made a decision. I wasn't selling it. I wasn't walking away. Instead, I emptied nearly every dollar I'd managed to save, signed loan papers I barely qualified for, and started rebuilding the place one board, one nail, and one room at a time. That first winter was brutal. There wasn't any working heat, so I slept inside a sleeping bag every single night. After grinding through 12-hour shifts at work, I'd come home exhausted and spend hours watching YouTube videos at 11 o'clock at night, teaching myself how to patch a leaking roof. I negotiated with contractors who automatically assumed I had no clue what I was talking about just because I was a woman standing alone on a construction site, wearing a hard hat that never seemed to fit quite right. There were plenty of nights when I'd sit alone in my car at the end of the driveway, staring at the house and wondering if I'd completely lost my mind. Seriously, was I really pouring every ounce of my savings, every bit of my energy, into a place my own family considered worthless? Still, little by little, things started changing. The walls finally stood straight. The roof stopped leaking every time it rained. The old collapsing barn slowly transformed into a bright, welcoming guest house filled with natural light. Then another idea came back to me, one I'd read about years earlier in a magazine and never forgotten. Lavender. I decided to turn the surrounding acres into a working lavender farm. At first, it sounded crazy. Heck, maybe it was. But sometimes the craziest ideas end up becoming the best ones. The second year brought the first real signs that all those sleepless nights and endless sacrifices were finally paying off. Tourists started making the drive out from the city just to stroll through the lavender fields. They'd stop by the little wooden stand I'd built beside the front gate, buying dried bundles, handmade products, and snapping photos that somehow found their way all over social media. By the third year, I had a waiting list for weekend stays at the guest house, a small team of 4 employees, and for the very first time in my life, a business that was completely mine. When my mother finally showed up to see it, I hadn't invited her. She'd heard about the farm from one of my cousins who'd spent a weekend there for a little getaway. She stood in the doorway of the main house, her mouth hanging slightly open as she looked around at the restored wooden beams, the freshly painted walls, and the endless fields stretching across the afternoon sun in shades of gold and purple. I watched something change behind her eyes. It wasn't pride. Not even close. It looked more like calculation. She never congratulated me. She didn't ask how I'd managed to pull any of it off. Instead, she wandered through the property in complete silence, running her fingertips across the countertops I'd installed myself before finally turning toward me with an expression I recognized instantly. I'd seen that same look my entire childhood. It was the one she wore every single time Julian wanted something. "You have 72 hours to give this place back to us," she said flatly, like she was reading a grocery list instead of trying to erase 3 years of my life. "Julian's apartment isn't working out anymore. He needs something stable. Your father would have wanted the land to end up with him eventually anyway. You've done a nice job fixing it up, I'll give you that, but it was never really supposed to stay yours long term." I stood there in my own kitchen. Inside the home I'd poured my heart into. The place I'd nearly destroyed myself trying to save. And I didn't say a single word. Not because I didn't have anything to say. Because I already knew exactly what was coming next. Honestly, I wanted to see just how far they were willing to take this. 2 days later, I heard gravel crunch beneath a set of tires. I glanced out the front window. Julian's pickup truck rolled into the driveway. The bed was stacked with moving boxes. Like the guy already figured he was moving in. He climbed out wearing that same confident, entitled grin I'd seen my whole life and started walking toward the house like he already owned every inch of it. Then he looked up. He took in the beautifully restored farmhouse. The thriving lavender fields. Guests relaxing on the porch with glasses of iced tea. The business sign near the entrance, a name that had quietly built a loyal following online. His smile disappeared. His face darkened. And for the first time in his life, my brother realized he'd completely underestimated me. Julian stopped dead at the edge of the driveway, one hand still gripping the truck door, staring at everything he'd never expected to see. He'd pictured an old, run-down farmhouse he could take over and flip for quick cash, a place that would bail him out after months of falling behind on payments for that fancy Manhattan apartment. He'd already burned through most of his savings trying to keep up with a lifestyle he couldn't really afford. Instead, he found himself standing in front of a thriving business, paying guests enjoying their stay, a farm stand bringing in steady weekend traffic, and a woman standing on the porch who looked nothing like the sister he remembered, the one who used to quietly shrink into herself during family dinners. Julian stood frozen at the edge of the driveway, one hand still gripping the truck door, staring at everything he never imagined he'd see. He'd expected a rundown farmhouse he could swoop in, take over, and flip for a quick profit, something that would rescue him after months of falling behind on the payments for that Manhattan apartment. He'd already blown through most of his savings trying to keep up with a lifestyle he couldn't really afford. Instead, he was looking at a thriving business. Paying guests wandered around the property. The farm stand was pulling in steady weekend traffic. Lavender stretched across the fields in neat rows, and the woman standing on the porch didn't look anything like the sister he remembered folding into herself during family dinners. "Sienna," he called out, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Wow, this is incredible. Mom told me this place was still falling apart." "It was," I replied calmly as I walked down the porch steps to meet him halfway. 3 years ago. "So, I take it you're here because of Mom's 72-hour deadline." He shifted awkwardly, glancing toward the guests relaxing on the porch, then over at the perfectly maintained rows of lavender swaying in the breeze. His eyes landed on the guest house with its fresh coat of paint and flower boxes beneath every window. I could practically see the gears turning in his head. He was doing the math, trying to figure out how the joke he'd laughed about had turned into something bringing in real money. "Look," he said, softening his voice the way he always did whenever he wanted something. "It doesn't have to get messy. You could stay here and help run everything. I just need my name added to the deed." Mom's right. Dad probably would have wanted this land to end up with me eventually. You know how he was about legacy, keeping things in the family. I looked him straight in the eyes. "I am the family, Julian." My voice stayed calm. "I'm the one who saved this place. You inherited a $2 million apartment the day Dad died. I inherited a house with a hole in the roof and mold climbing the walls. Nobody handed me a future. I built one with my own 2 hands. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. Not a real one. So he reached for the same card he'd played our entire childhood. "Mom's gonna be really disappointed if you fight this," he said. She already told everyone at Aunt Carol's dinner that the property was finally coming back where it belongs. You're gonna embarrass her. I almost laughed. The property already belongs to the family, Julian, I said. I'm still your sister. I'm still her daughter. The only thing that's changed is that I finally stopped waiting for either of you to notice. Right then, another car rolled into the driveway. Gravel cracked beneath the tires as my mother's sedan pulled in behind Julian's truck. She climbed out already talking before she'd even shut the driver's door. Sienna, be reasonable, she snapped. Julian needs stability. You've obviously landed on your feet out here. You can always start over somewhere else. I let her finish. 3 years of rebuilding had taught me more than construction. I'd learned patience. The same patience that helped me reframe crooked doorways, repair leaking roofs, negotiate impossible budgets, and price lavender bundles for the farmer's market. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened the folder I'd been keeping for exactly this moment. Before either of you says another word, I said, turning the screen toward them, I think you should see this. The folder contained everything. The updated property appraisal. The official business registration. The guest house booking calendar showing every weekend reserved for the next 4 months. Even a letter from the Regional Tourism Board inviting the farm to be featured in a magazine spread. This isn't just a house anymore, I said evenly. It's a business. It's registered entirely in my name. Every dollar invested came from my savings, my loans, and 3 years of my blood, sweat, and sacrifice. I looked directly at my mother. And before you ask, yes, I already had a lawyer review Dad's will the very first day you hinted over the phone last month that you planned to take this away from me. Her face instantly lost its color. She hadn't expected that. She thought she'd gotten ahead of me. You've been making plans behind my back, I continued, deciding how to divide up something I built from absolutely nothing while I was out here working 16-hour days, making sure this place didn't fall apart the way everyone assumed it would. I took a slow breath. I'm not upset because you doubted me. I paused. I'm upset because neither of you ever bothered asking how I was doing it. You just assumed I'd fail. And when I didn't, you decided to take it instead of admitting you were wrong. Julian stared at the ground, completely silent for the first time since he'd pulled into the driveway. My mother opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. The 72-hour deadline she'd thrown at me so confidently just days earlier now hung awkwardly in the air, completely meaningless. You're both welcome to visit, I finally said, keeping my voice calm and steady. It didn't shake any more the way it used to every time she raised hers. Heck, you can even book the guest house someday if there's an opening, just like everyone else. But this land isn't up for negotiation. It never will be again. Neither of them answered. Julian slowly nodded once, turned around, and walked back toward his truck. The moving boxes were still stacked neatly in the bed, untouched, exactly where he'd left them when he showed up expecting to move into a place he'd never earned. He climbed inside without another word. A few seconds later, the engine started. Then he drove away. My mother stayed behind for another minute. She searched my face carefully, almost desperately, like she was hoping to find the daughter who used to apologize just to keep the peace, the girl who'd stay quiet, give in, and convince herself that keeping everyone happy mattered more than respecting herself. That girl wasn't standing there anymore. Eventually, she looked away. Without saying goodbye, she got back into her car and quietly drove off. I stood there for a long moment, watching the dust settle over the driveway as both vehicles disappeared down the road. Then I turned around and looked across the lavender fields. The breeze carried their scent through the air. Guests laughed on the porch of the guest house. The business I'd built with my own hands was alive all around me. 3 years earlier, everyone had laughed when my father left me this broken-down farmhouse. They saw an abandoned property with a collapsing roof, mold-covered walls, and land nobody wanted. I saw an opportunity. Not because I was smarter. Not because I was luckier. Because I refused to quit when everyone else had already decided I would. For years, I'd been told that Julian had vision while I only knew how to work hard. Turns out, hard work built the future everyone else failed to see. And that's the funny thing about being underestimated. Folks will ignore you while you're struggling. They'll laugh while you're putting in the work. They'll tell you your dream doesn't make any sense. But the moment your sacrifices start paying off, suddenly everybody wants a piece of what you built. The truth is, success doesn't just change your bank account. It reveals people's character. Some celebrate your wins. Others try to claim them. That day, I realized I hadn't simply saved an old farmhouse. I'd finally saved myself. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need my mother's validation. I didn't need my brother's respect. I'd already earned something far more valuable: self-respect. And nobody was ever taking that away from me again. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or made to feel like you were never enough by the very people who should have believed in you the most, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stick around. Because sometimes the sweetest comeback isn't getting even. It's building a life so good that the people who doubted you are left standing there wondering how they ever got you so wrong.